Hello, everyone. Good morning. So, it's a pleasure to join all of you here today, devoted leaders and advocates. I've said so many times that internally we can just get so much done with our inside maneuvering. It's the outside mobilization that makes a difference, improves the quality of our legislation, and that's why we're here today, to hear stories from the outside, but to sing the praises of those who are doing the work, working with groups, giving hope to people, because people are scared about what the Supreme Court did. As we gather to lift up the stories of women across the nation, I just want to call attention to the priority that the Women's Caucus and all of us have for Brittany Griner. We thank the President for making that a priority in negotiations, to have her set free from a who knows what kind of trial and under who knows what kind of an arrest. But she has visited the Capitol. She's someone to be admired, and we thank her for her sportsmanship and her excellence there, and her wife Cheryl and their entire family, and thank the President. And I know the Secretary of State will be having that in his negotiations with the Russian Minister of Foreign Policy, Foreign Affairs, whatever they call it there. Today, the Democratic Women's Caucus and Pro-Choice Caucus are shining a light on the GOP twisted vision of America. Emboldened by the Supreme Court, they are waging the Republicans in Congress are waging a dark crusade of punishment and control. They don't believe in birth control, but they do want to control the lives of women in our country. Here in Congress, House Republicans are calling for a national abortion ban, voting almost unanimously against a woman's right to choose and the enshrinement of Roe v. Wade into law, and even the right to contraception. The right to contraception. As I said to them on the phone, do you know what's going on in your own families, in your own homes? In state capitals, Republicans are already tearing away reproductive freedoms and targeting the right to cross state lines. And the Republicans voted against preventing that from happening, because their agenda is about more than abortion and birth control. Again, it's about controlling women. Amid this assault on freedoms, Democrats are putting people over politics. We are ferociously defending the right to make decisions about women's health, their bodies, their lives, proudly voting to make Roe v. Wade the law of the land, reaffirm the freedom to travel where you want and see who you want, and establish a federal right to use birth control. As we fight to enact these protections, the American people are overwhelmingly on our side, outraged by the GOP's anti-woman, anti-American agenda. The Democratic women of the House are gathered here in the halls of Congress to say loudly and clearly, we are not going back. We are not going back. No. So our purpose here is to share stories. And allow me to share a story from Physicians for Reproductive Health, and thank them for their leadership, about a doctor who encountered a young patient just 13 years old. This little girl had been assaulted by her mother's boyfriend. By the time her mother discovered the abuse and sought out care, the girl was 23 weeks pregnant. The doctor looked at this child wearing a Mickey Mouse sweatshirt, little girl, and later said she could not imagine going through such a trauma, only to be told, you must deliver this baby. This is the kind of unimaginable pain Republicans want to inflict across the country. Just think of that family. Just think of the abuse of that child. Just think of the complicity of the Republicans in Congress in that abuse. It's now my honor and privilege to yield to the Assistant Speaker, Catherine Clark.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and what an honor and privilege to be with my colleagues from the Democratic Women's Caucus. We are fighting for freedom for women and people of this country. And I want to share Kate's story. Kate was elated to find out that she was pregnant. But then she learned later on in her pregnancy that her baby had a catastrophic brain malformation. Her baby, if it survived birth, would never walk, talk, swallow, or be able to support its head. She asked, what would a child like mine be able to do? And her doctor replied, would my child be able to sleep? And the doctor replied, children like yours are not comfortable enough to be able to sleep. If Kate's baby survived birth, her life would be short and excruciatingly painful. So Kate and her partner made the decision, their own personal decision, to have an abortion. This decision was made from love, to protect this future child of theirs from a life of pain. But because of restrictive abortion laws, Kate was forced to travel 2,000 miles to receive the care she needed. And even though her insurance covered abortion, they denied her claim because she had gone out of network for the procedure. Kate is one of millions of women who have had to leave their home state, take time off from work, and pay thousands of dollars out of pocket to receive health care. This is unacceptable. The Republicans' extreme agenda will only make Kate's story more and more common. That's why House Democrats will keep fighting for your freedom to make these most personal decisions. This is about people over politics. And now it is my pleasure to yield to Representative Barbara Lee.
That's okay. Thank you very much. First, thank you, Madam Speaker, for your tremendous leadership on behalf of women and people and our country each and every day. I also want to thank our Women's Caucus for really, our Democratic Women's Caucus, for never letting up when it comes to women's equality and reproductive freedom. Countless people across the country will now have to fear jail and retribution for making their own decisions about their body. And we know that these laws will disproportionately impact Black people, people of color, and low-income people. And people of color know what it means to be subjugated to unjust laws. And so we must tell these stories to highlight how this radical agenda is not legal jargon, it's impacting lives. AD, those are her initials. She's a 35-year-old social worker and doula. The soonest she could be seen after a positive home pregnancy test was a week out, which put her at 8 weeks. She said that she felt guilt and shame as this decision was intended to be. And she emphasized, and she said that when she ran into all of these roadblocks, she said it's important that we understand that this is cruel by design. Then there was Lauren's story. When Lauren was 20, she wanted to end, in fact, she was ending an abusive relationship. She did not want to raise a child with this abusive partner, but she sought medical care for abdominal pain and was surprised to learn that she was pregnant despite being on birth control. Her doctor told her that it was an ectopic pregnancy and recommended medication injection into the cells to save her fallopian tubes. Lauren said she would have terminated the pregnancy even if it weren't an ectopic pregnancy because of this abusive relationship. She believes everyone deserves the dignity and level of care that she received. She is grateful for the doctor's quick diagnosis of the ectopic pregnancy and for the early medical intervention that preserved her fallopian tube. After finally ending this abusive relationship, Lauren met her now husband and has a 5-year-old son, and she lives in North Carolina. There are real-world impacts on these decisions by these extremist jurists. Laws around the country will continue to stigmatize, criminalize, and endanger women. And let me just tell you in closing, I know firsthand the fear and the stigma and the danger of a pre-Roe world. We cannot accept a world in which people are criminalized for making their own health care decisions. We are not going back. We are fighting back. We are fighting back. Now I'd like to yield to my colleague and friend, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, who has been such a great leader for reproductive freedom and women's equality and rights, even before she came to Congress. We served together in California legislature for many years, and I am delighted to be able to introduce Jackie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for your fierce support for women's autonomy of their bodies. Thank you to my great colleagues who are here, and thank you to Congresswoman Lee. Let me be clear. Women are not chattel. They are not vessels for men's needs to convey power or confirm manhood. I'm going to read from a constituent letter. She wrote, "I've served in special education for 40 years. In my years of service, I've known women and girls under 14 who were sexually assaulted primarily because of their disability and age, made them very easy targets. These victims included those who were blind or wheelchair bound or with a severe learning disability or intellectual disability. One teen I knew with intellectual disabilities was raped 3 times before she was 16. Some didn't even have the understanding or language facility to know what was happening to them or to identify the attacker later on. Their immature bodies, prescribed medications, or other health conditions would have made it unlikely that any of them would have been able to carry a baby to full term. Or if they had, it would have likely resulted in their suffering permanent internal damage. We are absolutely unprepared for the substantial increase in services that this loss of reproductive health care will result in. No one, including the legislators and justices celebrating the seismic, far-reaching decision today, will have the resources nor the bandwidth to deal with the unthought-out consequences of this reckless decision tomorrow. My constituent is exactly right. These legislators did not think. These justices did not think. They did not think about the rape victims or the teenagers who aren't ready to be parents or the moms who want to be able to take care of the children they already have. They didn't think about the women experiencing miscarriage, as I have, who will die waiting to get sick enough to be offered life-saving care, or the profound trauma women will experience being forced to carry a pregnancy to term, sometimes only to deliver a stillborn baby. They weren't thinking, or they simply did not care. There's no humanity in any of this. All patients deserve the right to abortion care. It's our bodies, not theirs. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce one of our new colleagues, the powerful Melanie Stansbury.
Good morning. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the Speaker and our fierce and fearless female leadership of the House of Representatives for standing with women and our reproductive rights all across the country. It's an honor to be here this morning in a long line of champions for women's equality, such as Representative Spear, who have worked across generations to protect and to expand our rights. We should be celebrating today all of the ways in which we have protected and expanded women's rights across our generations. But instead, I am standing here today as part of a new generation who is having to fight for the same rights that our mothers and grandmothers fought for generations ago. I am proud to represent the people of New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, where abortion remains safe and legal, where our legislature had the foresight a year ago to remove an antiquated and unconstitutional abortion ban from our books, and where our governor just weeks ago signed an executive order to protect abortion providers. But we know this is not the case in states across our country, such as Texas and Mississippi, where in Texas, SB 8 was passed months ago, and women are having to drive hundreds of miles to our state to get care, which is increasing wait times and straining our already strained healthcare system, putting their lives and their safety on the line. The story I want to share today is of CH, a clinical worker, who is reporting seeing women from Texas driving hours through the night to come see her. In particular, she recalls a patient who said she had to leave by the morning so that her husband did not find out that she had come to this clinic, but the clinic could not guarantee her departure time. The freedom for people to decide what to do with their bodies has been taken away by judges and politicians who are putting their power before and their politics before our people and their lives. And today we woke up as women standing here with fewer rights than those of our mothers. But we cannot give up hope. We must instead harden our resolve, because we are not going back. And we know that there are glimmers of hope across every community in this country. And I want to remind everyone that the second half of the Dobbs case is the Jackson Women's Health Organization, which is an abortion clinic that is at the center of that case. And instead of shuttering their doors permanently, instead decided to move to my home state of New Mexico to continue providing care. Because these providers, like the women who are standing here behind me, remain resolved to ensure that we can protect our fundamental right to control our own bodies and our own human dignity and future. The rights of our communities are on the line, and that is why we as House Democrats and the House Democratic Women's Caucus remain resolved, remain in this fight, and under the determined leadership of our Speaker, will keep fighting until we protect reproductive justice and ensure that it is the law of the land. And with that, I want to introduce and pass to our fearless co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, Ms. Lois Frankel.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. All right, you got it. Well, you put it right there. Let me down there. Okay, that's good. Okay, thank you, Catherine Clark, for your assistance.
That's why I'm Assistant Speaker.
That's why that's a good one. She's the assistant speaker. And Melanie Sandsberg, just to let you know, I was one of those grandmothers that fought for reproductive freedom before Roe v. Wade. It's so great to be with all these champions for reproductive freedom. Look, we know that the Republican-appointed Supreme Court has dismantled access to abortion for millions of Americans. And to let you know, the women of Florida are worried. And here's one of our stories. Samantha was in the foster care system and became a victim of human trafficking at age 14. By 17, she was raped and pregnant. And at 13 weeks pregnant, she did get the help she needed at Planned Parenthood. But what if she had shown up to Planned Parenthood just a couple of weeks later? Florida now bans abortions at 15 weeks with no exception for rape, and the governor has vowed to expand limitations. And you know what the penalty is if you perform abortion past 15 weeks? It's the death penalty. Hard to believe. So then what? What do we do? Look at this map. Florida, like many of those in the South, are walled in behind a block of southern states banning or severely limiting access to legal abortion. Where does a Samantha go if she doesn't have the means to get on a plane? Georgia has a 6-week ban with no exception for rape. South Carolina is the same way. Alabama has a total ban with no exceptions. Mississippi is the same. And hundreds of miles away from Florida is North Carolina with a 72-hour waiting period. This is just one cruel story, and there will be thousands of more every year. And thank you, Assistant Speaker. Good job there. Now to introduce one of our co-chairs of the Pro-Choice Caucus, Diana DeGette from Wisconsin. Colorado. She's from Colorado. Wisconsin's not doing well either.
Colorado's doing great. Thank you so much, Lois, and thank you for your wonderful leadership of the Women's Caucus. Along with Congresswoman Barbara Lee, I'm the co-chair of the Pro-Choice Caucus in Congress. The Dobbs decision was decided just a month ago, but the stories that we're telling today are actually true. How could this happen so quickly? The reason is because for the first time in our history, the Supreme Court has suddenly removed a right that we had for generations, for 50 years. And the Women's Caucus and the women of Congress are here today to say We are not going to stand for it, period. We are going to work every day between now and November and beyond to make sure that my daughters and my new little baby granddaughter Eva have the same rights that I had growing up. And that is what we're here today to talk about. I want to tell my own story, which is a story that is all too familiar. All of you have heard the tragic story about the 10-year-old girl who was the victim of rape, who was denied abortion care. And that's the nightmare scenario some of us feared would happen if the Supreme Court reversed Roe versus Wade. But since then, we've heard heartbreaking accounts of healthcare systems, including in my own state, which has solid pro-choice laws. But because of people coming in from other places, the healthcare systems are overwhelmed. Patients are being denied care, and women are being forced to carry unwanted pregnancies to term. In Texas, a woman who was denied treatment for a miscarriage under her new state's abortion law was forced to carry her dead fetus in her womb for 2 weeks. Another woman who had survived a sexual assault chose to be sterilized after the state's new abortion ban took effect so that she wouldn't be forced to give birth to a rapist baby just in case she ever got raped. I ripped my organs out, the woman said. It's sad that I can't have kids, but it's better than being forced to carry a child. In Louisiana, a woman who was experiencing a miscarriage was forced to deliver the fetus in a painful and traumatizing labor and delivery after she was denied what would have been a routine 15-minute procedure. Telling her she would have to be induced and pushed out the fetus was one of the hardest conversations I've ever had, her doctor said afterwards. In Texas, doctors worried about violating their state's abortion ban are now delaying care to patients with pregnancy complications until their lives are, quote, in danger to protect themselves from being sued. And in Ohio and elsewhere, doctors are now reporting that they are routinely consulting lawyers before they proceed even routine medical procedures. There are more stories, and they are sad stories. These stories are only going to increase as the horror of the Supreme Court's decision takes effect. And with that, I'm so proud to introduce my friend and colleague, Representative Grace Mink from New York.
Thank you so much to Congresswoman DeGette for your leadership. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade left women across the country in a perilous situation. And it's not just women, but it's young girls. Young girls as young as my kids, ages 12 and 14, and in some cases even younger, who have endured traumatic assaults. As a parent of 2 tween boys, I know, as much as I love them, that it's difficult even to watch them make sure that they're making smart decisions about whether to play basketball or video games versus doing their homework. And I know that at their age, and especially even younger, that they would not be ready to be a parent. As a member of Congress from New York City, I'm fortunate to represent a state that has moved to protect a woman's right to choose and not to take it away. I've heard so many stories from individuals across New York City who are incredibly thankful for the fact that they still have access to such critical healthcare options. Today I want to share with you a story on the importance of access to abortion care. This story is from Danielle from New York City. I was 23 years old when I found out I was pregnant for the first time. I was less than a year out of college and living paycheck to paycheck with my then boyfriend. While I loved him, we had a toxic and sometimes abusive relationship. And that positive pregnancy test removed our rose-colored glasses. We realized abruptly that our relationship was not sustainable, that neither of us were happy, and that there was no way we could raise a child in that environment together, or in a way that would be best for a child. So both of us knew that terminating the pregnancy was the best decision we could possibly make for ourselves and for the child. We lived in a state where I didn't have to endure a mandatory waiting period, drive thousands of miles to a clinic, or go through mandatory counseling. Instead, I made an appointment at our local Planned Parenthood 5 minutes away, walked into a safe, caring environment, had a surgical abortion, and walked out of that clinic with my body, my freedom, and my future back. A week later, my boyfriend and I broke up. And 6 years later, I was pregnant again. This time, I was in a happy, healthy relationship. I was financially stable, and I knew I was ready, willing, and able to be a mom. I walked into another Planned Parenthood, and for the first time, had someone tell me that I was going to be a mom. My abortion is why I am the mom I am to my now 3-year-old son. My abortion is why I have a loving relationship with a man who is kind and supportive. My abortion is why I was able to fulfill my childhood dream and become a writer and editor in New York City. I now yield to our leader, co-chair of the Women's Caucus, Brenda Lawrence.
I want to thank you all for giving us this opportunity to tell the stories of so many women who were not heard, women who had the responsibility and the challenge of making a decision about their own body. I am proud to be the co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus, and I stand here with my co-chairs to today stand in strong support of continued service for abortion and reproductive health care nationwide. Access to abortion care is incredibly important, no matter who the person is or their circumstances. I like to tell the story of Colleen, a fellow Michigander, made the choice to have an abortion when she was 20 after being raped. I want you to think about that word rape. If you can even put your mind around you being forced to have a sexual relationship with no right of saying I want to or not, most of the time very physically abused, and then to learn growing in your body is the result of a violent attack. I want you to know that she remembers walking through the angry picketers and wondering if they knew how I became pregnant, would they still yell at me and insult me? If they were in that room when I was being abused, what would they say to me? So when Colleen found out about her pregnancy, the choice was not difficult for her. And she says, and I quote, "I saved my life, and I hope it will continue to save others." I want to thank Colleen for allowing me to share her story today. And I want to close with this. It's my body and it's my decision. It is my body and it is my decision. A woman's fundamental health decisions are hers to make. Not a man, not a politician. It is hers to make. With her ability to consult with a doctor, her loved ones, and I will say it, and her God. This is her decision. And to be dedicated, we're standing here today for fair right of any human being. We have not talked about men having vasectomies. We have not talked about men getting Viagra. And I think there should be equality. If we continue down this road, let's, as the Women's Caucus, debate when a man can have a vasectomy. When can a man get his Viagra? If you want to talk about my contraceptives, I bet there will be a lot of men running from the room. I am so proud to yield to my vice chair of the Women's Caucus, and that is Representative Veronica Escobar.
Buenos días amigos. Es un orgullo estar aquí con ustedes. Los republicanos quieren controlar las vidas y los cuerpos de las mujeres, mientras que nosotros, los demócratas, tenemos fe en las mujeres y tenemos nuestra confianza en las mujeres. Make no mistake about it, my friends, the dark vision that Republicans have for America has deadly consequences. I am here to proudly uplift the story of one of my constituents from El Paso, Texas. She is also a mother, like me, and a Latina. When she was pregnant with her third pregnancy, she had 2 children. She and her husband were delighted. They were thrilled. They were happy. They couldn't wait to meet their new baby. They had a crib. They had a space. They had hopes. They had dreams for this baby. In her third trimester, her doctor told her that her baby was not viable. And as she learned more about the condition that her baby had, she learned that not only was her baby not viable, but that pregnancy was now a threat to her life. And she had to make a decision, a terrible decision, with her husband and with her doctor about what she would do next. She knew she had to terminate that pregnancy if she wanted to make sure that her children had a mother. She knew she had to terminate that pregnancy because she knew that she couldn't leave her husband behind a widower. So she did, and she went to a clinic, and as she walked to the clinic to get the procedure she needed to save her life, she was heckled and yelled at by people with the arrogance to believe that they know better. People so arrogant who believe that they know better than her and that they know better than her doctor. She told me she couldn't even mourn the loss of her baby because of what she was dealing with just walking into that clinic. This is the vision that Republicans have for America, not just in Texas, not just in Florida, not just in red states. This is the vision that they have for every state in America, where it's not enough to put women's life at risk. They won't stop until they put women behind bars. So, my friends, we are here to tell you that we won't go back. We can't go back. We absolutely will fight every step of the way because the women whose stories we are here to uplift deserve better. Our constituents deserve better. Our daughters deserve better. With that, I would like to introduce my incredible fellow Texan, fellow incredible fighter for women's reproductive rights, Lizzie Fletcher.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for your inspiring and important remarks about the moment that we find ourselves in right now. And thank you to Speaker Pelosi, Assistant Speaker Clark, the Democratic Women's Caucus leadership, the Pro-Choice Caucus leadership, and pro-choice advocates who are with us here today for being here to share these incredibly important stories that every American needs to hear and needs to know and needs to understand the very real threats and consequences of the extreme laws that are being passed, criminalizing abortion care and criminalizing those who care for people who have abortions. I know it because it's happening, and it's been happening in my beloved home state of Texas. We are in a healthcare crisis, and for months we have already felt what people across the country are feeling today since the passage of SB 8 that went into effect last September. And I'm here to tell the story of Houstonians who have experienced the cruelty of this law. Elizabeth and James of Houston know the crisis, and as I said, and this is so important, the cruelty all too well. Elizabeth and James were full of joy when they found out that Elizabeth was pregnant earlier this year. At first, things went smoothly. At 17 weeks into her pregnancy, they learned that they were expecting a girl. On May 10th, 18 weeks, Elizabeth went for a walk outside, and she came home, and when she stood up, she said she felt something shift, and all of a sudden, a burst of water rushed out of her body. She screamed as her water broke, and she was launched into what she called a dystopian nightmare of physical, emotional, and mental anguish. James rushed home and rushed Elizabeth to the hospital, where an ultrasound confirmed that she had suffered premature rupture of her membranes. They were distraught and they were heartbroken, and they knew that they needed to end the pregnancy. The risks to Elizabeth's health were simply too high. As Elizabeth's OB-GYN began to arrange the procedure, she faced obstacle after obstacle after obstacle because of SB 8, because of a law that Republicans in Austin put into law in Texas. And after many phone calls and much advocacy on Elizabeth's behalf, her doctor came to her room and broke the news to her in tears that she could not get an abortion, that she could either stay there and wait to get sicker, and where she could at least be monitored, or she could wait until there was no cardiac activity and have the procedure. Elizabeth knew that things were deteriorating as she was experiencing cramping, she was passing huge blood clots, she had yellow and foul-smelling discharge. She knew what was happening in her body. But the dilemma that she faced was so painfully clear. She had to wait to get even sicker than she already was, or wait until there was no more cardiac activity. And either way, all she could feel was fear and grief. 4 days later, 4 excruciating days later, Elizabeth gave birth to a stillborn daughter. Elizabeth and James mourned. Elizabeth and James were angry. Elizabeth and James were in pain. And they knew that the decision that they faced in that moment, like the decision facing, and this is really important because we've heard so many stories, it is a decision facing women and families at many other times, in many other circumstances, many other reasons. It is a deeply personal and monumentally important decision. And no one is better positioned to make it than the woman and her family who are making that decision. Yet the Supreme Court has now set us on a dangerous path forward that jeopardizes the health and undermines the equality of women in Texas and across the country to make these decisions for themselves and for their families. And extremist lawmakers in Texas and many other states are making it even harder, creating a crisis that is an affront to our values and undermines our ability to make our own decisions about our lives. But lawmakers here, who I am so proud to stand with this morning, will continue to respond to this crisis and to move us forward to protect the rights of all Americans to make their own decisions and to protect the health, privacy, dignity, and autonomy of women across this country. Thank you for being here to hear these stories.